The following is a transcription of an audio cassette I discovered in my father's safe shortly after he died. The tape has been transcribed for you here in its entirety, for my own sake. Can you say that again?
Which part?
The date, Dad. The recorder wasn't close enough. I want to make sure we get everything.
Why is it so important that you get every last detail anyway?
Because that's what the doctor said, Dad. The more detail we get, the better he can help you.
Oh, is that right? He's gonna help me, huh? How's he gonna do that exactly? Stuff some more magic pills down my pocket? Maybe sign me up for group therapy? Those are always loads of fun.
No, I think he just wants to get a better understanding of...
He can't help me. Nobody can. Better psychiatrists have tried and failed. You wouldn't believe me anyway. There's no point.
Well, if nothing else, it would help us and the doc to make better decisions regarding you. Look, I promise that I will listen to everything you have to say. I promise I'll believe you, okay?
Don't say that. You can't promise me something like that. It's a bullshit statement, and you know it.
Alright, fine, fair enough. I promise that I will try to believe, okay? I'll try. Look, forget about the doctor, alright? I want to know what happened that night. Me. I want to know what you were doing in Norway. Why you can never get a damn good night's sleep. Just tell me. Please.
Fine. February 20th, 1943. That's when it all went down. The Axis powers had been almost completely driven out of Africa, and the Soviets had effectively turned the tide of war in Eastern Europe. We had the Nazis on the run, for the time being at least. They were vulnerable, sure, but they still had every capability of rebounding and kicking our asses. As such, the US was particularly interested in taking out any and all Axis weapon development programs.
Weapon development programs? What, like their tanks or the atomic bomb? Or...
Exactly. The Allies specifically targeted their hard water factories to cripple their production of the atomic bomb. But there were other targets. So-called wonder weapon projects scattered all over German-occupied territories. Manufacturing depots, chemical weapons labs, bioweapon research centers, etc. That's what I was doing in Norway.
Where in Norway did they send you?
Northern Norway. Far off the mainland lay an island with a Nazi outpost on it. Very little was known about the place at the time, regarding its exact purpose and mission. According to our spies inland and the Norwegian rebels, the locals referred to it simply as Fort Ond. They said it was a bad place, that the prisoners who were taken there were never seen again, that the waters bordering its shore were barren of all aquatic life, and colder than even the most bone-chilling frostbite. Command didn't give a shit about any of that, though. Their only concern was two things. Why is this installation so far from the German homeland? And why is it so far from mainland Norway? The conclusion they came to was that the Nazis had to be developing some sort of weapon there that they didn't want to risk infecting a lot of people with.
So, they thought it was a chemical weapons plant?
No, they thought it was a bioweapons lab. Smallpox, anthrax, you know, that kind of stuff. We thought that's what they were doing there, but we didn't know for sure. That's where my unit came in, and where Operation Maelstrom was greenlit.
Maelstrom?
I didn't pick the damn name. Anyway, they wanted to keep the operation as covert as possible. Minimal manpower. One squad of British SAS. One squad of Canadian commandos. And last but not least, one squad of Army Rangers, including yours truly.
Was the purpose of the mission just to gather intel, or?
Our first priority was the eradication of the fort's inhabitants, and the seizure of any relevant intel. However, we were also prepared for it to turn into a sabotage mission at a moment's notice. Leadership felt pretty confident about the bioweapons theory, and didn't want to take any chances with letting the stuff potentially get away. Hence, the limited manpower. The last thing we wanted was for the Krauts to get spooked by a large invasion force and flee with any samples.
Dad, are you okay?
Yeah, just give me a second.
The metallic opening sound of a lighter can be heard, along with the sizzling burning of paper. Really? You gotta do that now, huh?
What? Oh, I'm sorry. Is the smoke gonna bother your little nose that much? Would you prefer I do it some other time?
I'd prefer you didn't fucking do it at all. Though, in a way, it's oddly inspiring. A senior citizen, part of the greatest generation, still puffing that shit all these years like it's of no consequence to his health.
Fuck the consequences. Can I continue now? Or is this gonna turn into an intervention? Because if so, tell me now so I can save you the time and just leave the room and enjoy the rest of my smoke.
Please continue.
We were all flown to Iceland for our briefing. From the moment I arrived, I had my doubts about the operation. The sheer lack of intel we had to go off of regarding fort size, manpower, and exact purpose just seemed odd to me. I remember thinking to myself, I hope this is enough men. When I did so, I caught my friend Weathers looking around too. I could tell he was thinking the same thing. From there, we boarded a British destroyer that took us less than 10 miles from the island. We had to travel the remaining distance on our own in 2 PT boats. I remember just how cold it was that night. How we all subconsciously stood closer to each other than normal, in a vain attempt to try to stay warm. Like a bunch of penguins, the lot of us. It was a half-hour ride to the island, so we stayed like that for a while, just hunkered up and tried to keep warm as much as we could while we waited for any sign of something. When we were about a mile from the island, we got that sign. We saw it long before we ever got near this stuff. When we did, we all went silent and watched as we slowed down our boats to make a cautious approach. A thick fog had blanketed the sea around the coastline in all directions for about a half mile. It had a faint red hue to it. Not a deep red, just faintly visible. It towered above us nearly 15 feet in the air, like a tidal wave, and seemingly stared us down. We slowly crept our boats up to it, inch by inch, until our bows were nearly kissing it. From there, a few of the Canadians on the adjacent boat got out some equipment and began probing the fog for any sign of toxins. We all sat there and waited for them to finish their work. As they did so, I took notice of the absolute unnaturalness of it all. It made no movements towards, nor away from us. Yet it billowed and contracted and breathed soothingly in place, like you would expect a body of smoke to do. I remember distinctly thinking of it not as a wall, but more like a veil or a curtain, hiding the island from us. A few minutes later, the Canadian signaled over to our boat and gave our commander, Captain Hawks, the thumbs up. The fog wasn't toxic, as far as they could tell. Given our mission, though, we couldn't take any chances of it being a gas of some kind. Better safe than sorry. So we donned our gas masks and made sure our suits were nice and sealed up. I, in particular, had taken the liberty of duct taping around my gloves and boots to ensure it was airtight. Then we started our boats back up and slowly sailed on into the unknown. At first, I couldn't see anything. The fog was so thick it limited my visibility to just a few feet in front of me, and even less so in front of the boat. We couldn't have our lights on for fear of being spotted. When we were out in the open water, this was fine, of course. The moon and stars lit up the surrounding waters nicely for us. But now there was little to no light penetrating the fog. We were engulfed in near total darkness. So we just slowly inched our way forward as safely as we could. I just sat there and watched the red vapor hit and dance off my goggles while I searched for any sign of land. For a while, nobody said a word. We all just waited for what seemed like an eternity. The longer we pushed ahead, the tighter the grip on my rifle became, as my nerves started up. Finally, one of the Brits broke the silence. I watched him tap the man in front of him and heard him whisper, "Are we sure this is the right?" His sentence was quickly interrupted. We had landed. The entire boat shook wildly as a few of us lost our footing and had to grab the sidewalls to stay upright. As we did so, I looked around me and noticed the fog gradually growing thinner as we made our approach. Steadily, its opacity diminished. I could begin to see shapes through the veil. The crunching noises ceased a few seconds later, and with them, so too did the fog from my line of sight. It was still there, but it was thinner and lower to the ground than it was over the open sea. It only came up to our knees from that point on, which meant I could finally see our objective. The island. It was a mess of scattered, jagged rocks and hills, caverns and towering cliffs that seemed to scatter in all directions, like a porcupine made of stone. At its center, one giant hill stood out. I followed it from the base to the peak with my eyes, and at its peak, there was a door. That was it. Not a trace of human life. No pathways, no trenches, no buildings of any kind. Nothing that would suggest any sort of operation was being undertaken on the island. There were a few guard towers, of course. We knew at least that much from our aerial photos. But we had chosen our landing site specifically to be in a blind spot they wouldn't see us from. That was it, though. Apart from the door that stuck out amidst the terrain, looking utterly unnatural in the distance, there was not a sign of life. No buzzing of insects, no splashing of fish, no chirping of birds. Even the wind itself seemed to bow before the island's authority and ceased completely. No life whatsoever. I thought back to when we first encountered the fog, and just how right I was in my thought process. We truly had crossed a veil of some kind. Captain Hawks gave the hand signals. We all filed out and patrolled inland as fast as we could to a nearby cave. The Norwegians were waiting for us there.
The Norwegians? Were they the ones who gave you the fort's intel to begin with?
The very same. Adding them to our roster brought our total strike force to 35 men.
Dad? It's okay, Dad. Take your time.
We headed into that cave and linked up with the Norwegians, who sat steadfast in defensive positions. One of them stood up as soon as we breached the darkness of the cavern and swung his gun over in our direction, shouting at us to presumably lower our weapons before quickly lowering his own back down and making a half-hearted apology attempt. Hawks was livid. He stormed over to the man and, with one forceful strike of his fist, he sent the poor Norwegian hurtling towards the ground.
You some kind of fucking moron, kid? I was this close to blowing your goddamn head off.
The commander of the Norwegians rushed over to stand between the two of them.
Please, forgive us, sir. We've been on edge since we arrived a few hours ago. It was an honest mistake.
He helped his fallen soldier back to his feet and ordered him to the back of the cavern to tend to his face. Afterward, he and Hawks stared at each other for a few seconds in silence, while we all just waited for one of them to speak. The leader of the Norwegians spoke first.
Something is wrong, very wrong. Our intel is severely off,
he said.
None of the guard towers have occupants, and we haven't seen a Nazi soldier patrolling the island for 3 days now. We've been spying on the island for weeks now, as best we could. The entire time we did so, soldiers were patrolling the shores, manning the towers, and watching the coastlines. But 3 days ago, this fog emerged, obscured our vision, and made it nearly impossible to see anything on the island. Since we arrived, we've done multiple sweeps and scouting runs along the island's surface before your arrival. No one is here, American. Not a soul. It's like they just vanished. At least from the island's surface.
I looked back over at McKinley, who did the same. We exchanged confused looks at one another before looking back at the two leaders, who were now talking too quietly to one another to hear. Finally, Hawks turned to face us and, with a deep sigh, said,
"We think the Nazis have locked themselves away within the fort's cave systems and interior. According to our good buddies here, the island's surface is safe. Let's hope they're right. Conduct final checks on all your equipment, then form up by the cave entrance. We're going in." We got into formation and made our way up the rough terrain to the door I spotted when we first landed. As far as we could tell, it was the only entrance to the interior of the fort. The ascent was nerve-wracking. The cold, wet staircase that led up to the fort's entrance proved difficult to scale with all of my equipment, which was made all the more dangerous, of course, by the fog.
with it clinging to around knee level on every surface of the island. It made it damn near impossible to see where we were stepping. So we just slowly tiptoed our way up to the door as best we could. All the while, nobody uttered a word. It was so quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat throbbing in my ears. Eventually, we reached the top of the stairs. The door itself was monolithic.
Monolithic? What, like ancient?
Oh yeah. Stood nearly 9 feet tall and looked like it was made out of bronze or copper, I don't know. Some kind of faintly orange metal. It was covered in strange engravings that could only be described as hieroglyphic. They weren't, of course, but that's the only comparison I've been able to find since that day. Believe me, I've tried. Looked through every damn book I could think of. Nothing comes close to the symbols and markings I saw engraved on that door. It was like a foreign language of some kind. It didn't look like it was written or chipped away from the door by an expert's hand, so much as it looked like it was slashed or cut, like something had hacked away at it with claws or teeth to create the strange writing. It didn't look like a human's hand had done it. Looking up at the door, I felt like an explorer, like I had found something lost to mankind for millennia and was rediscovering it. Only I didn't want to be the person to discover this. At that moment, I wasn't sure I wanted to be aware of this place's existence, let alone have to open the damn thing and walk past it into God knows what. We readied our explosives, expecting to have to breach our way in. To our surprise, however, the wooden beam that was attached to the door lifted. The monolith opened slightly, and with it came the stench of utter, all-devouring rot, like pus and spoiled milk, bile and sulfur, all fused into one unholy concoction that assaulted my nostrils and instantly forced tears down my cheek. At first I panicked, believing my mask wasn't secured tight enough, and I was inhaling a toxin of some kind. But when I looked up, I saw all of my team members doing the same. Our masks were all working fine. We couldn't have all had a potential leak, right? The smell was truly just that powerful. The door had only given way and opened a tiny bit. Our front man quickly had to ask for help, as the door was too heavy to heave by himself. 4 men, me included, pushed with all our might, and then quickly ran out of the way as soon as the door was completely opened, so the guys behind us could aim down the opening. When they did, they didn't see much. Their flashlights shined straight into a wall that angled down and away from us. What lay before us was another staircase, carved out of the very stone of the mountain itself. The fog clung lower to the ground, past the doorway, only coming up to about ankle height, but it still obscured the steps all the same as the walk up to that point. We stared down the doorway, waiting for the order to advance. But Hawk said nothing. He just stood there with his gun trained ahead, and his other hand held up, silently telling us to wait. I suspected he was listening, waiting to hear any commotion from us opening the heavy door, for any sign of the enemy. There was none, however. Not a sound could be heard from down the staircase, just like everywhere else so far. Goff leaned over to me and tapped me on the shoulder. "Something's not fucking right, man," he whispered. I didn't respond. I didn't feel like I needed to. Everyone was already thinking the same thing anyway. No point in vocalizing it, especially not when I could visibly see what Hawks was thinking. I watched a chill run up his spine that shook his held-up hand and rifled slightly in place. I'd never seen him like that before. He steadied himself, and with a low, reassuring grunt, which was probably more for his benefit than ours, he gave the order. "File in." So, down we went. We descended for about 20 feet. The staircase itself was dark, but we could see light at the bottom. The sight of the light was a relief. Instantly, I felt a tiny shred of my anxiety wither away as my instincts took hold, and I readied myself for any Germans that might be waiting for us at the bottom. There were no Germans, however. None left anyway. None alive. When I reached the bottom of the staircase, the scene laid out before me was like something you'd see at a crime scene. It was a big square room, illuminated by a gas lantern in its center. The door directly ahead of us led to an opening in the floor, with a ladder hooked to it, with two doorways on our left and right, like a plus sign or a cross. Various crates and workstation desks laid toppled over, and all faced the direction of the newly discovered staircase. Like sentry posts, they all faced toward the same point. Scattered throughout the room were the Nazis, half sunken into the fog and slightly obscured by it, draped over crates, leaning up against the walls, crumpled up like a soda can in the corner. There were at least a dozen of them. Their blood pooled beneath our feet, but I could hardly notice it through the tinted fog. I took a step forward, and that's when I heard the familiar jingling of empty bullet casings beneath my feet. Subsequently, bullet holes could be seen in nearly every square inch of the wall in front of us. Jesus Christ! Weathers shouted as he entered the room behind me, prompting Hawks to hold up his hand, again signaling for him to shut up. "Whoever the fuck did this might still be here. Stay frosty," he muttered sternly to us. "Fan out. Check the rooms on our flanks," he commanded via hand signals. Half our men went to the room on the right, while the remaining went left. I, along with 3 others, stood guard in the lit room and kept our guns trained on the ladder ahead of us. As I knelt behind a crate to take a better defensive position, I noticed one of the Nazis was lying face down in a puddle of his own blood close to my right. I kept my rifle trained ahead as I slowly reached over and heaved on his shoulder, forcing him to roll onto his back. He had a look of utter terror frozen onto his face, with eyes wide open and mouth agape. He bore cuts and large slash marks up his chest and torso, which caused his entrails to expose themselves slightly. I looked around the room at the other men to verify, and sure enough, the ones who weren't submerged in fog shared similar wounds of varying size and volume. What the fuck happened here? I thought to myself. This thought was quickly overtaken by a doubly terrifying realization. I looked at the bullet holes directly ahead of me and thought, whatever the hell happened here, I'm standing in the same place they were. After a few tense moments of sitting with that realization, the squad checking the right room emerged holding a few books and folders. They bore similar engravings to the ones seen on the door upon our arrival, and were bound in leather so ancient that it looked like the faintest breeze would disintegrate them if they weren't careful. They showed it to Hawks, who took one of the books and began sifting through its pages. At first, he scanned the pages carefully and thoroughly, but he quickly thereafter began to shuffle through them, frantically and impatiently, before reaching back and shoving it into his pack. Right about that time, the squad from the left room emerged. A British soldier approached and said, "Just more dead Krauts, sir. There's something. We found cages big enough to fit a human in. There were bodies in them, but they weren't civilians." The Norwegian team leader interrupted. "These fucking animals." Hawks looked like he was getting ready to say something, but he didn't get the chance. All conversation and thoughts were stopped when the sound of screaming could be heard down the ladder. With one uniform motion, all remaining men turned their guns to face the same direction as I already was. We waited for what felt like an eternity, for a head to come bobbing up the opening in the floor, for the sound of footsteps, for any sign of the enemy. Nothing came. After about a minute or so, Hawks gave the order. We were going down there. I don't want to do this anymore.
Dad, please, you can do it. Just take a second, okay?
The smell, Patrick.
What about it?
My grandpa can be heard taking a huge huff of his cigarette, followed by loud coughing.
Dad, what did you see at the bottom of the ladder? A well. It was a large, cavern-like room with multiple passageways that branched off in all directions. But at its center was a well, made out of the same stone as the mountain itself, and yet it somehow looked older, more ancient, more monolithic. Along its rim were the same damn etchings and carvings as the door. Upon closer examination, we saw that it was the source of the fog that had plagued us since our arrival. We watched it for a while and observed the fog billowed up, out, and over the top of the well in all directions at a constant, unnatural rate. I couldn't believe that such a tiny source could have produced as much as we'd seen up to that point. I couldn't believe that the colossal wall that we encountered upon our arrival originated from such a minuscule well deep in a mountain. As we spread out to cover the other passageways, I approached it and leaned over. Patrick, the smell was so fucking strong that I was thrown back onto my hands and knees almost immediately from the stomach contractions. It was the source of the fog, of the smell, everything. What was in the well?
Blood. The whole fucking thing was filled with blood. More blood than I'd ever seen in my life. More than the room upstairs. More than any other mission I'd ever been on. And it was fresh. It boiled gently and seemed to move on its own, as though it were alive and aware of our presence in the room. And when I gazed upon it, the attack on my nose and stomach seemed like one of calculation, as though a cobra had spat in my face for daring to get too close. I wasn't allowed even a second to recover from the stench, however. At that exact moment, we heard more screams, seemingly from every passageway in the cavern, emitted what I can only describe as wails of anguish. Like the flesh was being peeled off somebody's forearm and pouring salt back into the wound at the same time. They pierced all of our ears like razor blades and made me wince so hard I almost forgot about my stomach pain. How fucking big is this place? I thought to myself. What the hell could be happening just down one of these tunnels? "Fuck this," Hawk said. "Start planning charges. We are getting the fuck out of this place as soon as possible." It was music to all of our ears. One of the soldiers came over to check on me as the rest began to start laying charges. There was nothing professional about our process. We were just laying them out as fast as we could so we could get the hell out of that wretched place and back to the boats. The screams continued the entire time we worked.
Were they getting closer?
I don't know. They sounded like they were coming from every passageway all at once, but it was hard to tell. We had a man eyeing down every doorway just in case. It didn't matter. We should have been watching the well. As I struggled to compose myself and get back to my feet, I had a front row seat to what was about to happen. Goff, that poor bastard. He was doing his rounds, laying his charges along the floor. Around the well, I wanted to speak up, to tell him not to get too close. But I was still sucking in air through my teeth and couldn't get the words out. All I could do was hold my hand out to him and grunt. He turned to face me.
"You gonna make it?"
was the last thing I heard him say. At that very moment, an arm shot out of the well behind him, locked itself around his neck, and pulled him into the well head first. The arm was inhumanly long, more like a tentacle than an arm. But its form was undeniably human still. It wrapped itself around his neck and dug its fingers into the side of his face as it dragged him deeper and deeper down. I watched him thrash around and kick his legs wildly in a vain attempt to get free, spraying torrents of blood in all directions around him. He was already halfway submerged by the time our men got a hold of his feet. When they did so, another arm shot out of the well and locked itself around Goff's waist, now pulling him in faster. I could hear gurgling and see bubbles of air making their way to the well's surface. The poor bastard was drowning in that putrid liquid. The men pulled with all their might, but it didn't slow down his descension in any noticeable way. They heaved and barked orders to the others like rabid dogs, desperate to save our comrade. But no help came. We were alone with the incomprehensible, and it was winning. The rest of us simply stood by, dumbfounded, and watched as he was forcibly dragged down the well, inch by inch. When it was clear that the men could do nothing more, they let go and took a few steps back. Their entire arms were covered in blood up to their elbows. For a moment, nothing happened. Nobody said a word, moved a muscle, or did anything. We all just faced the well and tried our best to process what had just happened. It didn't last long. The well began to gurgle and bubble as though it were digesting my friend. It began to overflow. Slowly, the thick crimson liquid oozed over the top of the well and onto the cold stone floor beneath, making its way towards us. I was the first person to make a move. I stood up and began to slowly step backward towards the ladder. That's when the massacre began. In an instant, all of hell erupted around us. The same arms that had dragged my friend to an then unknown fate sprang out of the walls around us as though the island were alive, and began to frantically swing around, searching for a body to claim. A few of them found their mark and pulled some of the men towards the walls, wrapping themselves around their necks, locking them in place and suffocating them. Any sense of composure our toughest men had remaining left their bodies that very moment, as we all made a mad dash sprint for the ladder. The room was only dimly lit by all of our flashlights, though. When we broke our formation and began to run, our visibility became significantly more limited. Bodies ran into each other, and men began slipping on the blood that had now reached all of our feet. The fog had also begun rising in intensity at a startling rate, and was now almost as thick and copious as it was out on the sea. This made it all the more hard to tell what exactly was happening. And before I knew it, I was knocked onto my ass by one of the Canadians as he ran straight into me. The blood rose higher and higher at an inconceivably fast rate. It was halfway up to my knees by the time I regained my footing. When I did, I felt a sudden rush of movement brush by my left leg. That's when I saw it. There were shapes moving in the blood. Large, serpentine-like shapes that slithered all around us and began to quickly encircle my team. Like sharks, they enveloped us, poised for the kill. They seemed to be probing us for weakness, waiting for the exact right moment to strike and take as many of us down as they could. I wasn't gonna let them get me. My body moved independently of my paralyzed psyche as I sprinted for the ladder and leaped as high as I could to escape the cavern. However, the ladder was barely wide enough to fit one man on it. It was made of wood and was not meant to support the weight of more than a couple of men at a time. I remember just how carefully we had to scale it just to get down to the cursed room in the first place. I worried it was going to give way at any second, and I would be stranded in that room with those things. With the well. I felt it crack and buckle beneath me as more men than intended all tried to climb it at once. I pushed into the man above me, just as the person below me did, all in a desperate race to escape. Just when I was sure all was lost and I would never make it out, I reached the top and rolled onto my back. As I did so, I heard a loud snapping sound, followed by 8 loud splashes, hitting the liquid beneath. I rolled over and shined my flashlight down the hole to look at the scene and try to help some of the men escape what had now become a tomb. It was no use, though. It was 20 feet down. I couldn't reach any of them. Weathers, McKinley, they stared up at me and shouted for help. But what was I supposed to do? The blood had risen to about waist height by that point, and there were more of those fucking things still circling them. They climbed over one another in a desperate attempt to get enough height to reach the exit, but it was nowhere near enough. I felt so helpless. I watched the mysterious shapes and figures in the blood creep up to them from behind. Then, as if coordinated, in an instant, they pounced on and dragged 3 men under the murky depths all at once. In that split second, when they had leapt from the blood to attack the men, I caught only the faintest of glimpses of their true form. They were like eels or leeches with spider legs and beaks. Something of that family. But it's still not an accurate comparison. They were truly otherworldly, inhuman even to creation itself. They were abominations that I'm glad were obscured by the fog, as to have glanced upon them in all their unholiness would have been too much for me at that moment. They yanked the men down into the ocean of blood. As they did so, the men thrashed around chaotically and knocked more men over, making the already futile pyramid of terrified men all the more pitiful. That's when I noticed the 3 who were taken by those serpents were being dragged towards the well. They were being dragged to the well so it could devour them, just like Goff, and take them away to some unspeakable fate. I looked at the edges of the room to search for the first victims of the attack. The ones who had been forcibly dragged towards the walls by the arms. When I found them, I felt my stomach churn once again. The bodies were halfway into the cavern walls. The arms were dragging the men head first into the island itself to be consumed. It was as though the island itself was alive. The well was alive, and it wanted us dead. The remaining few screamed and pleaded and begged me to help them. All I could do was stare down at the chaos before me and watch. I was ripped out of my comatose state by a firm hand on my shoulder. It was Hawks. "Get up. We gotta get the fuck out of here." He picked me up by the back of my shirt and dragged me to my feet, pushing me up the staircase. I had no activity coursing through my head, and yet I ran. My body was truly on autopilot. I couldn't think of anything other than the men we were leaving behind, and the look I saw on their faces as they screamed at me for help. The fog had now completely engulfed the inside of the fort, and I struggled to maintain my footing as I ran as fast as I could through the first chamber and up the staircase. As we exited the main door, I was stopped dead in my tracks. I heard gunshots behind me. By God, they were still alive. They were still fighting to get out, and I was abandoning them. Hawks once again yanked the back of my shirt forward as he walked past me. "There's nothing we can do for them. We have to get to the boats, now!" And with that, he ran off ahead of me through the red smoke. Every fiber of my being compelled me to go back, but my body refused to obey. I just stood there, trembling, white knuckle grasping my rifle, as I struggled to make a choice. After a few agonizing seconds of contemplation, I followed after Hawks and made my way to the boats, to freedom. As we sped away from the island at top speed, I was able to slowly creep back to the real world mentally, and finally take note of my surroundings. It was me, Hawks, and 3 other British troops. Only 5 men had made it out. None of us said a word. We all just kept to ourselves and stared off into space, doing our best to process what had happened to us. I looked back at Fort Ond one last time before it disappeared over the horizon. The fog had grown larger now, redder, hungrier. When we got back to the destroyer, we told command everything that we saw and what had happened. They didn't believe a word of it. I can't really say I blamed them. We must have sounded insane to them, showing up missing 30 men, covered head to toe in blood, rambling about a mysterious well, our friends being dragged away to an unknown fate by strange creatures, ancient bronze doors, and slaughtered Nazi soldiers. They told us that we had most likely been exposed to a nerve agent, that the base was being classified as a possible chemical weapons lab, and that when we inhaled the fog, maybe we were subjected to it and its hallucinogenic properties. But we were sealed up head to toe. We stood up for ourselves as best we could. We all corroborated each other's stories and validated each other's testimonies. We swore up and down till we were blue in the face that the island was not what we thought it was, that our friends had been killed by an unknown force, and that we had to destroy the fort. They just stared at us like we were a pack of lunatics. They had made up their mind about what had happened to us on that island. Any attempt made by any of us to set the record straight only served to make us look even more insane to them. I turned to one of the admirals and spoke up, one last time. I had to know something before they turned us away. Please, tell me you guys are gonna level that fucking place. He stared at me for a few tense seconds before simply saying, "We'll handle it." And with that, it was over. All remaining members of Operation Maelstrom were discharged the next day, deemed mentally unfit to continue service. Each of us was briefed individually on the events of that night, and I was told not to utter a word to anyone about the events of Operation Maelstrom, or to disclose the fort's location to anybody. The colonel who was briefing me told me, "For the record, I believe there's at least a little truth in what you told us. But regardless, you and the survivors are a liability now. Unstable and erratic. We can't risk putting any of you onto another operation. Not after what happened to you. Or at least, not after what you think happened to you. I'm sorry, but this is for your own good." I was put on a plane the next day and sent home. That's it. You don't believe a word of what I just said, do you? Well, no, not all of it. I mean, I want to, but it's a little much to process. I know how it sounds. You think I don't hear myself saying this shit to you? I know how it must sound. But it's the truth, son. The well is real. What happened to me was real. I'm sure it must have felt that way, Dad, but you don't believe a fucking word of it. Nobody does. You, the doctor, and every other person I've confided in just think I'm some fucking lunatic who imagined all of this. I see the way you're looking at me. Like I'm just some poor old man who's losing his mind. I know what I saw. I know what I went through. You weren't there. I know I wasn't. I'm not saying I was, Dad, but come on, work with me. Isn't it possible it was a nerve agent or something? How the hell would you know it wasn't? Because we all saw the same damn thing. All of the survivors of Maelstrom gave the exact same testimony upon our return. Everything from our encounter with the fog to our return to the ship was synced up perfectly. What? Do you think we all hallucinated the exact same thing? No, I just think that maybe, they took the books that Captain Hawks acquired. Oh yeah, they made sure we kept nothing from our mission. They stripped us bare right after we returned to the ship. But he told me what he saw in those pages. More of those strange symbols, those hieroglyphs of unknown origin. The mention of a Torzer hole, some kind of fucking portal to hell, or somewhere worse, or God knows where. You want to know why I can't sleep at night, Patrick? The real reason? It's because I know it's still there. We'll handle it. Yeah, like hell they did. They probably just set up shop themselves and tried finishing what the Kraut started. Or maybe not. Maybe they heard our warnings and listened to us. Maybe they shelled the place into oblivion and actually did handle it. But I'll never know, son. I'll never get my closure on the events that happened that night. I'll never get to know with 100% certainty that the well has been sealed and that whatever lies in the depths of Fort Ond can't get me anymore. Let's just take some deep breaths, okay? Why don't we just calm down and... This was a waste of time. It always is with you people. Dad, please. We're done here. Turn that damn thing off and get...
The tape ends there. I couldn't find any additional tapes in my father's belongings. So, for the time being, that's where the story ends too. I didn't know my grandfather too well. He died when I was 12 and was a recluse, so sadly, this tape is one of the only glimpses I've ever gotten into his life. I don't know what to believe. It's easy to write him off as crazy or the victim of a gas attack. But the fear I heard on that tape sounded so real. That's gotta mean something, right? If nothing else, the torment he endured was real. And maybe that's all that matters. Or maybe, just maybe, he's right. Maybe Fort Ond still stands exactly as he described, hidden somewhere behind the veil of fog.